many of you have been here at least once, so you know what we're talking about is the idea that we have been invited to grow older. We don't really have a choice, but seeing it as a holy invitation, as part of God's plan, does change the way I think we do it. And so we have talked a little bit about some of the metaphors that are helpful when we think about growing older. We've talked last week about one of the really important tasks, if we're going to do some inner work, that we're called to do as inner people, which as older people, which is forgiveness. And today I'm supposed to talk about grief, but my daddy's funeral was just like 24 hours ago, and so I decided I'm not going to do that. We're going to talk about blessing, and I'm bringing in a friend to help us next week talk about grief. That probably makes a little bit more sense. So here's my question. What do you think the mark of deep spiritual maturity is? I mean, you guys are smart people. You've done lots of Bible studies. You've been in lots of classes. What would you say the mark of deep spiritual maturity is in general? Just shout it out. Listening. I think that's a mark of spiritual maturity. Stillness.
Never losing hope.
Always hopeful.
Yeah.
I love it. What else?
I like the comment on what you're saying, living in the present.
Being very present, in the present. Present. There you go.
Forgiveness.
Well, I hope, since y'all remember that from last week. Being able to forgive. What else? Huh?
Willing to change.
Some people might even say openness to transforming, right? Not a bad one. What else?
There are three things that are required of us.
Ah.
The first one is to walk humbly with your God, and that is the measure
Of true spiritual maturity. Yep. Walking humbly with God. What else?
Other-centered.
Being other-centered. Yeah. The opposite of self-centered, right? Okay. Those are all really good things. If we were going to go to Scripture, a couple of things we could look at. We could look at the fruits of the Spirit, right in Galatians. We could make a whole list. Let's see. A mark of spiritual maturity might be kindness, patience, self-control, right? All gentleness, all those wonderful things. I mean, I could write a book on that. We could do a whole sermon series. Marks of the Spirit, right? Things we all need to be looking toward for spiritual maturity. The Apostle Paul also, some people would want to go to 1 Corinthians 13, his great love chapter. The faith, hope, love, abide, these three, but the greatest is love. And y'all didn't put that on your list, but we could make a whole list that is biblical of marks of deep spiritual maturity. Problem with love is it has so many different meanings, and we tend to, look at it as kind of a big category. You could look at the Sermon on the Mount. Now, this gets a little more personal, a little more specific, because if you want to look at the Sermon on the Mount as a kind of a mark of spiritual maturity, you'd be looking things like not judging, right? That's a big part of the Sermon on the Mount. Praying constantly, that's a big part of the Sermon on the Mount. Forgiving is a big part of the Sermon on the Mount. Anti-materialism and anti-money is a big part of the Sermon on the Mount. And then all of the blessings. And the blessings don't necessarily sound like things you would want. Blessed are those who mourn, right? Blessed are the poor, or the poor in spirit. So you have the lifting up of people and things that we don't even necessarily think of as spiritual maturity. So this is a difficult question. What I'm going to answer the question, yeah, Mike?
I was going to say, one other one of the Sermon on the Mount that people are uncomfortable with is turn your other cheek.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Yeah, take off your cloak and give it to them. And then give them your shirt too. Yeah. It's really, I know someone who is going through a tough time in their life, and they were instructed to read the Sermon on the Mount every day. Just these 3 chapters of Matthew every day. I would have never. I was kind of appalled when I heard that they were told to do that. I was like, that's mean, you know. This person tells me it changed their life. I mean, completely changed their perspective. So nothing wrong with any of this, but I'm going to suggest that there's another mark of deep spiritual maturity that you have not mentioned that I want us to focus on today. In this book, which the library actually has, Sacred Fire, by Ronald Rolheiser, who's my professor at Oblate School of Theology in San Antonio, 78 years old and still going strong, running the seminary, not doing the slowing down of elderhood like he preaches about. But in this book, he says this: the mark of a truly mature man or woman, the mark of a very mature disciple of Jesus, the mark of someone truly giving his or her life away is this: he or she is a person who blesses others and blesses the world, just as God does and just as Jesus did. That's kind of a profound statement. And some of you are going, I'm not God, I'm not Jesus. What do you mean blessing others and blessing the world? But this is what I want to talk about today. Giving one's life away. We've said this before as part of elderhood. It's really not about us. It's about the people around us and giving ourselves to them. Blessing others. What do we mean by that? And blessing the world. What do we mean by that? The very first time we met, a couple of you said to me at the end, well, this was very exhilarating. It's like we have a purpose as in our elderhood. This is really cool. Well, this is getting to the meat and the heart of the purpose of elderhood in our communities, in our churches, in your families, where you live. And so I'm going to try and pick it apart a little bit and see if this makes some sense to you, okay? And y'all stop me if you have any questions. Dietrich Bonhoeffer talked about this also back in the 40s. He said, a blessing is a visible, perceptible, effective proximity of God. I love his language. That what blessing is something that's happening that actually brings us into the presence of God. Blessing comes from the Latin word benedicere, which is just bene, well or good, dicere, to speak. So technically, all a blessing means, at least etymologically, if that's the word, is to speak well or to speak good of someone. Dallas Willard said it this way, who some of you may know, a really important American writer of contemplative Christianity. Blessing is the projection of good things into the life of another. It isn't just words. It is the actual putting forth of your will for good for another person. Have you ever had someone come up to you and give you a compliment? And you look at them and you hear the compliment, but the compliment, though it's very kind, it's words, right? And you know that they're being nice and they're saying the right things. You know, that was a lovely sermon, Pastor. Okay? How many times have I heard that one? Thank you for your words, Pastor. Those are good words. That may be speaking well, but it's not necessarily a blessing. Okay? A blessing, more than words, is actually putting your will for good on a person. So, for instance, I won't do the pastor thing because that's hard, but saying to a child, you behaved so well today. What a good child. Those are nice words. Saying to a child, you have so much energy, and I love that energy. And that's even if the child has misbehaved, by the way, is a blessing, because you're putting goodwill on the child and saying energy is good and you're good because you have a lot of it. Y'all know Bob Goff has written a new book, Everyone Everywhere, I think is what it's called. And in that book he says, don't tell people what they want, tell them who they are. And that's part of blessing as well. So nice sermon, pastor, and y'all can say it to me anytime, it's fine. But that's what a pastor wants to hear, right? There's nothing wrong with that, but it's nice words, not necessarily a blessing. You are a gift to this congregation. If you said that to your pastor, y'all just line up and tell Emily that next week, okay? That's a blessing. See the difference?
Yeah.
I mean, if it's true, right? Then that's a blessing. And I'm not saying you're doing anything wrong. I'm just trying to make it clear the difference between these things. This is not just, these writers don't come up with this simply because it sounds like a good idea or it's a psychological thing. This is actually incredibly biblical. It starts at the very beginning of the Bible. It starts in Genesis, right? Think about it. In Genesis, the story of creation. What happens at the end of every day after God finishes God's work? What does God do? It is good. It is good. These aren't just good words. God is putting God's will on the creation and blessing the creation at the end of every single day. We have this at Jesus' baptism, all four Gospels. At Jesus' baptism, there's a word spoken. Do y'all remember it? This is my son, it says this in one of them, with whom I am well pleased. So it isn't just nice words. It is a blessing because God is putting God's will on the ministry of Jesus, on who Jesus is. In Jesus' teachings, and we'll go back to the Beatitudes now. In Jesus' teachings, when he is saying, blessed are the poor, blessed are those who mourn, blessed are those who are persecuted, those aren't just nice words. It is actually putting his will on those people, God's will on those people, that they will be strengthened and encouraged and have food for the road. And then look at what Jesus does. Okay, look at what Jesus does. Some of our favorite stories in the Gospels are stories of Jesus' interaction with just regular people. And what he does often isn't just forgive a sin, heal a disease, give someone sight. There's often a blessing that goes along with it, right? Do you see your accusers around you? And the woman says, no one's left. And he says, well, I'm not going to accuse you anyway, either. Go and sin no more. By this definition, that is a blessing, putting God's will, Christ's will, on her for good in the future. Does that make sense? It's a pretty important model. And then, of course, we have very specific stories of blessings in Hebrew Scripture. Those are usually father to son blessings. They're complicated, and I really don't want to spend a lot of our time on it, but just imagine Jacob getting the blessing from his father, stealing the blessing, basically, from his older son. Joseph, there's a story of Joseph getting blessings from Jacob for his children at the very end of his life, at the end of Jacob's life. And that blessing, Jewish fathers still say over their sons, whether they're religious or not. It's for 3,000 years, fathers have been saying that particular blessing. It's the blessing of Ephraim and Manasseh. Isn't that right? We have any? Yeah. Thank you. I knew I had a biblical scholar in the front. Okay, it's the blessing of Ephraim and Manasseh is a 3,000-year-old blessing from that story at the end of Jacob's life that is still said over little Jewish boys. So I could go more in detail, but this is really a very important part of Scripture. And so these writers that I'm going to talk about, with this biblical knowledge, are looking at our elderhood as a time when this is normally what is called for by us. And we aren't really very good at it because we don't always see it coming. Okay, so that's what I want to talk a little bit about today. So this is my friend and my teacher, Father Ron Rolheiser, and I want to tell you a couple of things that he says. Remember, he's got 3 doctorates. One's in psychology, one's in theology, and one's in spiritual practice. So he likes to melt these things together. And one of the things that he writes about is there are real consequences when people are not blessed. And this usually goes back to family of origin, right? But there are real consequences for those who do not receive blessing from mentors, from teachers, from coaches, from their parents. And parents obviously play a big role in this. There are consequences of growing up in a sense, not reaching your potential, not really having the ability to kind of soar and to have good relationships. I mean, it can have many, many consequences. I don't want to kind of make us all feel guilty about this, but the truth is, the more opportunities we pass up to bless, the more people are left with these consequences. And so we obviously, as we get to the stage in life where we are now, we want to take every opportunity we can get and maybe grab some that we don't even know we have. The opposite of a blessing is a curse. And unfortunately, and this is biblical as well, woe, Jesus went on to say, woe to, right? It wasn't just blessings. In the Gospel of Luke, there's also woe to those who are hypocrites, who don't, forgive, all that kind of stuff. And curse is simply, in a very simple way, is anything we say or any action we do that basically says to someone, I wish you weren't here, or I really don't care about you, or go away. And that can be done. I mean, can you imagine being in the service industry these days with as kind of crazy as some people are, how much they have to put up with cursing? Not that people are using the bad language. I'm not talking about the bad words. I'm just talking about the attitude. I'm just talking about the get out of my face, leave me alone. Don't, you shouldn't be here. I don't want to deal with you. It's I guess it's okay in our culture today to treat people like that, right? Yeah. We can't control that necessarily, but we can control ourselves. So I take this kind of seriously. If things are really this black and white, a lot of life is not a blessing or a curse, it's just life. But if you have a choice, wouldn't you want to be a blessing rather than a curse in someone's life? I think we all would want to do that. There's a lot of this in families, of course. Now, I just pray that for every, 2 curses, maybe I do 4 blessings, I'm hoping. Because you can't always control the 2-year-old in the high chair throwing food. Think about it. You have an option. And you can say to the 2-year-old, stop it. Be quiet. I just mopped that floor. No, leave it alone. Which in a little 2-year-old mind is saying, you don't want me here. You don't want who I am. You don't want what I am. I mean, you don't mean to be cursing the child, but you could see it that way. Or you look at the 2-year-old and say, what a delight to have this kind of energy at 9 in the morning before my second cup of coffee. That's simple, but see how much easier it is for a grandmother to have the blessing attitude than the mom, who has to mop the floor and pick up after everyone. So that's just an example. This is also true in vocation. And I know many of you are retired, some of us are not, but this happens in vocation as well. And no one ever sat me, no HR person or seminary professor ever sat down to me and said, there's going to come a time in your career when someone younger, smarter, better looking, and more popular is going to come along and work for you. And you're going to have a choice. You're going to have a choice. You can either delight in that, think about it, or you can curse it. And if you're the boss or the superior, you've got a lot of power in that situation. And did anyone in your HR people, did anyone ever tell you that, any of that? You learn that, right? Either someone did it to you, blessed you, and so you know about it and you recognize it, or you get hit by a 2x4 somewhere along the way that, this is someone that you need to support and bless. I'll stop there for a minute and I want to say, do you have any response to any of that I've said? I've just dumped a lot on you. What do you think? Does it ring true to you? Yeah. Thank you, Isaac.
It reminds me of something that, I don't know who said it originally, but I remembered it said that you may not remember what people say to you, but you will remember how you felt
Yes.
when they said it to you.
Yes.
They may have made you feel good, or they may have made you feel bad.
That's very true. Yeah. And so again, we tend to focus on the words, but blessing is not just about the words, right? It's about the attitude. So let's break it down even a little more if we can. See, I brought her picture. I don't know her, but anyway, because to me that's this delight. There is a way in which when God said it is good at the end of creation, there was total delight. And when we bless at our best, in our elderhood especially, when we bless, it is out of delight. It isn't just, well, I need to do this, And sometimes you have to look really hard to find the delight, right? Really, really hard. But not so much with a 3-year-old. It's pretty easy. What are the characteristics of a blessing? See if you agree with this. First, the person is seen. They're really seen. And I think that's what you're saying is getting to, Isaac. It's like, I don't remember the words, but boy, I was seen in that moment, right? I was seen. And those of you, I know we've had some teachers here, and some of you just excellent teachers. You know what I mean. That child that's misbehaving or having trouble or kind of falling behind, maybe they're having home difficulties. Y'all know, y'all been through it. And you catch them just doing something so delightful. And they know you saw it. And in seeing it, you saw them. And then it hardly matters what you say at that point if they know they've been seen and caught in delight, in something good. And then there's the part of speaking well. So words do matter, This is not a place for unfiltered language, right? And unfortunately, we're all good at unfiltered. No boundaries. Yeah, no boundaries, unfiltered. So speaking well sometimes means you have to think about it. You have to kind of test it out. You have to form it. In vocation, in work settings in particular, HR people would say, think very hard about what you're going to say before you say it. You want to speak well. And this is the part that is a little more difficult, and I want you to lean in with me on this. Giving away some of your own life so that someone else can have more life. That is another aspect of blessing. And you're like, that sounds big. But it isn't always big. Let me give you just a simple family example. Okay, this is not life and death, but this is a blessing. Mother-in-law let's say she's someone like me. Little type A, always has the the things at her house, always does all the cooking, always, in charge. That's me. I have 2 incredible daughter-in-laws that live here in Austin. I mean, these women have been in my life for 15, 20 years, okay? I mean, beautiful young women. But our relationship for many, many years has been they come to my house and they sit there and, what can I do to help you, Mom? And I tell them what to do and they do it, About a year ago, a wise man, my partner, my husband, comes up to me and he says, Allison's 40, really gifted cook, really phenomenal person. Erin, I know she's busy with the kids, but she's got great taste in food and in decorating and in stuff like that. What if you kind of step back? If you let them have more say in things. And at the time, I thought he was just full of it. I was like, you don't know what you're talking about. They love the fact that I do it all, I don't know what you're talking about. It didn't occur to me till I got a little wiser and thought about it and watched and thought some more, that as long as I was taking up all that space, and doing my thing, they couldn't take on more responsibility for the life of our family. And we've kind of created this little get together once a week and have this little family time. And they're perfectly capable of that. And so with fear and trembling, right, I started to just step back and say to my daughter-in-laws, does anyone want to be in charge? And my older, wiser daughter-in-law, she was a little skeptical. You could see her saying, "You're up to something." Really? you really? But for her, and we've known each other for 20 years. For her, over about a 2-week period, and when I made it clear to her that I really, really meant it, that I could use a break, and that I knew she could step into it. And that day, she made sure I stayed out of the kitchen, in a very sweet way. But I watched her just almost get like an inch taller, and feel confident and feel, I know this sounds weird, blessed. But I had to give up something really important to me. That's what I learned. I really love being in charge of all that. I had to give that up so that she could gain it, or it wouldn't have been a blessing. If I had said, I'd love for you to do all this, and then I had rushed in and been micromanaging, there would have been no blessing in it. It would have just been, oh, there goes Mom again, So that's a small thing, but it can be a lot bigger. And some of you have done this in an even bigger way. When you have a mentee at work who outshines you, and you end up having to step back off a project, or you step back off of a position so that they can have it. Anyone tried that before? People really have to do this in real life, and you can either do it with bitterness, with regret, with those young whippersnappers coming in here and taking my job and getting my sabbatical and getting my publishing time and blah, 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 or whatever. Or you can do it with a blessing. This is not easy when younger pastors come in to a church and have to be the head of staff for older pastors. It's often a recipe for disaster, especially if that associate pastor had been head of staff while the church was calling that younger pastor. And it sounds like something I've been through. And Emily and I, we've now worked together for 7 years, but it has been a journey. And it's been a journey because of her spiritual maturity and mine, of me learning to give up things so that she can take it on, and to bless her, which sounds so weird because it's your boss. But when you're in elderhood, you almost always have younger bosses. And if you are wise and mature and that's the best way to relate to your colleagues. And you end up in a situation where everyone's younger than you, which is pretty much where I'm about to be. And you have to start thinking about this. How am I going to relate? I mean, I still do everything I'm supposed to do. I'm still a colleague. I still have to interact with people. But I also am in a position to bless because I can see things that my younger colleagues can't always see. I can think and speak, sometimes with good boundaries. And I also can give away some of what's important to me so that someone else can have life. I can't tell you how many times I've given my preaching dates to Kevin. Now, when it started, that seemed like a sacrifice because I love to preach. There's most associate pastors, you don't get to preach that often, so you don't give up your dates. Come on, you don't give up your dates. But now Emily knows I'm willing to do that. And she stops me. She's like, no, you need to preach. You haven't preached in a while, which is fine. But I'll be in the middle of a worship meeting and I'll private message her and say, why don't you let Kevin do that, you know? And she knows to trust me that what I'm trying to do is bless him with the experience. And he rises to the occasion every time we do. Okay, those are just personal. I don't mean to be too personal, but I'm trying to show you that this is not just something on paper. This is real life. And isn't it interesting that if you've experienced blessing, it does seem a little more natural to be able to do it to others. Would y'all agree? Yeah. How many of you think you experienced this kind of blessing in some way in your professional life? Okay. Yep. It's really interesting because when I meet young people who hate their jobs, a lot of times, I mean, there are a lot of reasons to hate a job, but just one person in that workplace that is a blessing, that can bless them in some way, can make a huge difference.
Stacy, is there
Yeah.
a risk of sounding too patronizing when you do something like this?
Let's talk about that, because we can't assume people really want a blessing, right? And running the risk of being patronizing and being rejected is a big part of this. And so really seeing someone before you start this process and trying to understand them is huge. And it's why we don't do it. Let's be honest. It's why we don't do it. Not because we're bad people, but because it seems a little like, who am I I'm not Abraham. I'm not I'm not God. I'm not Jesus. So let's talk about that a little bit. It could be seen as patronizing. When is a blessing most powerful? And y'all know this from your own experience. It's most powerful when it comes from someone who's your senior, someone who has power and or authority over you, someone who is of the generation above you, or maybe in the report structure above you at work, or has more life experience. That tends to be more powerful. Doesn't mean that young people can't bless older people. That I'm sure that happens, but these can be powerful, life-changing moments. And this is controversial, but there's a lot of writing and suggestion that women blessing women and men blessing men can be incredibly powerful. And it may have to do with families of origin. It may not be as important as our culture has moved and kind of become a little more non-gendered. Maybe it won't matter, but for people our age, I think it still matters that young men And by young, what's so funny is when we're saying young, we could be talking about 50-year-olds, couldn't we? That young men will find a lot of power in being blessed by an older man, and women in the same way. That may not be the case for your grandchildren's generation because they live a very much less gendered life than we did. When someone's heart is very constricted and very wounded, blessings can be really, really powerful. And people who have power, that would be coaches, teachers, pastors, bosses, supervisors, parents, grandparents, it can really make a difference when a heart has been constricted or wounded. And we don't want to get too psychological. I mean, when you've got a bunch of reports at work, you don't want to really be worried about their childhood traumas, right? But it's smart to know that we're all humans and we're all hurt in some ways. And so the more hurt a person is, the more powerful a blessing can be. Does that make sense? Y'all look really concerned right now. Blessings also are more powerful when they're pointing to wholeness and delight. So for instance, blessing someone for being very accurate on a spreadsheet. I mean, that sounds good, right? You do the best spreadsheets of anyone I've ever seen. You're just awesome at this. I mean, that is nothing wrong with that. But that doesn't point to delight and wholeness, unless you're really into spreadsheets. I don't know. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like you're differentiating blessing versus compliment.
That's a really nice there's nothing wrong with compliments, right? But a blessing might be more like, I have watched you grow in your ability to do these reports. I mean, you really have potential, and I love watching that happen. I love watching you and your confidence in this. That is a blessing. It's just a little different from a compliment, isn't it? And
what about when a highway patrolman stops you because you're going 30 miles over the speed limit, and he looks at you because you're older,
yeah,
and says, "This time I'm going to give you a warning," and you feel like it's a blessing.
That's right.
I'll never do it again.
Well, it is kind of a blessing in a way, because in a way they're showing some delight in stopping a really nice older lady and not having to deal with the crap that they usually have to deal with. I mean, so you're having a mutual good experience, which not everyone is going to have with the police. And I think this is important for parenting, and of course we're all beyond that, but many of us have kids who are involved in parenting, is complimenting a kid is not, I mean, I don't think is as necessary as we often do, unless it's going to point to delight and wholeness. And so I've started thinking about that with my grandchild and just said, that's a beautiful picture, or, oh, you're so pretty, or I love your dance, or what a fun song. What I'm trying to do now, I'm being taught to do this, is to, I mean, not that I'm not going to compliment her, sure, but if I'm going to give any praise, it's going to point to my delight in her, right? Does that make sense? Not necessarily her skill or whatever. It's my delight in her and the wholeness of our family and the love that we have for one another, or God's delight in her, which I mean is my right as grandmother to tell her constantly that God delights in her, all of her, even the messy part of her. Okay, so I am not a country person, as I've told y'all before, but Father Ron is. He grew up on a farm in Iowa, and so he spends a lot of time in this book, and I'm going to let you read the book yourself if you want to know more about this, talking about the birth of a baby calf. Have any of you ever done any calving? We don't have any farm. Okay. So baby calves are born really gross, completely constricted by membrane, right? And the mother, do y'all want to see a gross picture of it?
Sure.
Okay, there it is. Ta-da!
Oh, wow.
So that's all membrane on this little baby calf. And so the mother, nature teaches the mother immediately to start licking that off because the calf can't move and can't get up. And the important thing for a baby calf, I sound like I know what I'm talking about, doesn't it? So the important, baby calves have to get up and nurse like really fast. And so the mother has to do this very, very quickly, get it all off because it's constricting the little baby calf. And he sees this as a metaphor for what blessings do for children and for young adults and for young people in general. That whatever has constricted their little lives, their little hearts, whatever bad things are going to be said to them or done to them, that a blessing is like the lick of that mother cow trying to wipe away the constriction. And I kind of like that metaphor because it's not just about wounds that have to heal. It's about membranes of constriction that can be wiped away. And that even that we can partner with God in the way we bless to help wipe away those constrictions on the people we love or come in contact with. It's definitely made me think a lot about interactions with family. There's one way that this works in a family because we all have roles with our adult children, with our grandkids, but your adult children can be in their 40s and 50s and still need blessing. Shall I say that again?
Yes.
Your adult children can be 40 or 50 years old and still need your blessing. In fact, not.
That is true.
Yeah,
I'm 49.
You're 49. And it doesn't mean that the parent did a bad job. It's just that you are a primary source. You always have been a blessing for them. And now a primary source, a blessing for their children, perhaps. And maybe, in y'all's case, the grandchildren's children, right? And so I think that that's one arena that's really important. I think the other arena has to do with the young people in our lives who are not in our family. And this is where church can be a really important place for us to practice our elderhood as well, okay? Because we have young people all around us who did not receive the blessing that they needed when they were young. They're still trying to live good lives. They're still feeling that constriction. And you never know when you can offer that kind of blessing to someone in your life. I've begun to think of every time I'm gathered with a group here in the church, especially younger people, because I have a lot of younger people who report to me, I've kind of cut out in my head that I'm on the lookout. I'm looking for, is there a blessing here? You know, I mean, I don't think it's noticeable yet. No one has stopped me and said, you know, you're doing a lot of. I mean, I think I'm being cool about it. But anyway, probably not. But it is real conscious. It's something I'm being very, very conscious of. Because in my mind, that's how together we are going to participate in God's delight, is with this kind of blessing. So how does it work? Because the young don't always seem to want any kind of blessing from me. In fact, I was with a group not long ago of younger pastors who said, you know, if you would just kind of get out of our way and give us your jobs, that would be the biggest blessing we could have. Yeah, that kind of put me in my place, didn't it? Wow. Yeah. Now, it was safe. We were in a safe place where they could say that, and we asked. So, I mean, we got what we asked for. But I do think that is the attitude often, that you don't have anything that we need. If y'all probably aren't on TikTok or Instagram, but these rants that, you know, younger people will, about our generation and how we've ruined the world and we've ruined, you know, work and we've ruined everything. I mean, they have reasons to not really want to hear from us, but it's still our task It's still what we're called to do. And it isn't always about walking up and having this big confrontation. I mean, sometimes it can be as simple as acknowledging the young mother in the grocery store who thinks that her, crying baby is bothering you because you're of that generation and she's gotten curses before. And sometimes it's just as simple as smiling at her and saying, "Oh, what a beautiful child," And you don't even know them, you don't know her, but you see how that can be I see you. I know you're having a tough time. It's not bothering me. I'm not judging you. And you have a delightful 2-year-old who's just happens to be whining right now. That's not a problem. So sometimes it can be that small, not to be that old person, right? Don't be that old person that they're expecting, right? Y'all know what I'm talking about, right? Oh, yeah. Okay. Don't do it. Just don't do it. And one of the lines that that I read a couple of days ago is big-hearted maturity gives blessing anyway, whether it's asked for or not, whether it's wanted or not. If it's honest, if you really can look at that 2-year-old child and see delight, then you express it, And I want to be that. I don't know about you, but I want to be mature in a big-hearted way, right? And that's going to look like blessing. Love demonstrates itself this way. And I think this is important too. Don't confuse what someone wants on a surface level with what is needed on a deeper level. If you talk to a 35-year-old who's in the, trying to learn to be a good husband and has 2 tiny little kids, trying to be a good father, trying to meet the needs of the state of Texas, that's just said you have to drive in every day, even though it was supposed to be a remote job, trying to get all of that together. I guarantee you that young man doesn't know what he needs. He's too busy, right? And so many times, this thing about being patronizing, I'm not going to tell that young person, I know what you need. You don't know what you need, but I do. That would be patronizing. But saying to that young person, if you had the opportunity and it was natural, you have worked so hard and you have figured out how to do this. What a delight that you get to have this time with the kids, Good job, He didn't think he needed that, but there's a real good chance if you have a relationship with him and he cares about you that saying those things could help, could be a blessing. Does that make sense? Yeah. But they're not going to stop and ask you for it any more than a young colleague would stop and ask you for a blessing. I mean, they're too busy trying to impress everybody, right? But if you see something that's delightful or that you can delight in, and then make some space for them, they're not going to find that patronizing, I don't think. I think that they'll find that a blessing. So last week, we went over this whole thing with Rembrandt and this beautiful picture, The Return of the Prodigal. And I ended with this little quote of Henry Nouwen's. Looking at Rembrandt's painting of the father, I can see 3 ways to a truly compassionate elderhood. I'm going back to that. 3 ways to a truly compassionate elderhood. Grief, forgiveness, and generosity. And I'm kind of fixated, I guess, on the idea that real blessing kind of involves all 3 of these things. It can involve grief, because if you're going to bless someone, it's one thing to bless a little child for being a delight, okay? It's a whole other thing to blessing someone who's about to take your job, okay? There's grief in that, right? There is some forgiveness maybe in that. You know, you said, how do you do this kind of blessing without being patronizing? I think, how do you do this kind of blessing and forgive anything that might have been said or done that got that person to the point where you can bless them? Because sometimes there's some forgiveness involved in that, right? And then generosity. I mean, in the end, blessing is about generosity. You know, I do a lot of funerals, and I go to a lot of funerals, and you know when people stand up to do their little remembrances, you know who is a blessing, who blessed people. They don't say it that way, but you can just tell who saw, when someone felt really seen, when they were truly delighted in, and when someone sacrificed for them. And unfortunately, sometimes it's at the funeral where it kind of all comes together, right? Oh, wow, I was really blessed by this person. But it's a beautiful thing. I watched a 25-year-old young lady on Friday give this eloquent talk about her grandfather. At a young age, all of a sudden she's realizing all of the ways that he blessed her. There wasn't a dry eye in the house, you know, and that wasn't her intent. She didn't know she was talking about blessing, but she was. I mean, and it was beautiful. And I want us all to be like this, because in the end, the more we do this, the more blessed the world becomes. I mean, the kingdom of God sounds like a really big thing, but you know where it starts? Y'all know the Bible, you know, little mustard seeds. I mean, it starts with these acts of blessing. And I love that secular society is into kindness. I'm nothing against kindness. And I love, you know, Target has kindness journals and, you know, kindness this and kindness I love it. But blessing is so much more. And it is deep spiritual work to do it well. It really is. There are books that go into much greater detail than I have about how you can be a blessing. If you have people in your life that you really want to practice this with, you start with prayer, lots of prayer, and there are ways to think about how not to be just permissive, not to just be amoral, not just be, I mean, you don't have to look over things to bless someone. But there are ways that you can really concentrate on this. And it's easier once you get started than you think. It's easier than you think. Yeah, Phil.
Yeah, I think for me, I came to understand this some time ago, but the difficulty was getting started doing
Yes.
it. It felt very awkward.
It feels awkward.
Very contrived or something.
Yeah.
But I got used to doing it, but I was missing the low-hanging fruit because I wasn't doing it with Stephanie, you know. And I was just kind of taking, I guess, for granted all her qualities or whatever. And so I finally have gotten over that hurdle.
Good, good.
And it does feel awkward at first because
Very
I
awkward.
wasn't used to doing it.
Did you do it in the law firm?
Well, with my paralegal and with
Yeah.
people I worked with,
Yeah.
I did all the time because they were blessings. to
Yeah,
me.
yeah,
And,
yeah. You did take delight in them. Yeah, yeah.
And I told my paralegal that, you know, she would always give me stuff to review because that's the way people do things in law firms. And I said, you know, for these things, A, B, C, and D, you don't have to give these
Yeah.
me to review. You do them better than me.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
please,
Yeah, please, yeah.
go forth.
Permission giving, yeah.
And you know, she just sort of exploded in doing even better work. You know, really quite nice.
It's kind of a superpower. It's a superpower. Yeah.
I think an important point in all this is that it really, in order to do this and not have it feel so awkward or contrived, is that it needs to be authentic.
Has to be
It
authentic.
needs to be real.
Yes.
It needs to be
Yeah.
something you're not just giving them a compliment or trying to be a blessing, because you're making that up.
Right.
You really need to see them first.
You got to see it. Yeah.
And then you can, I think it's much easier to do once it comes from,
Yeah.
when it's real and it's real to you.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, because pastors, by our very nature and our role in a congregation, there's an expectation that we can bless, and it takes a lot of years to be in a congregation before you can see people well enough to be able to do this well. It can be very contrived for young new pastors in particular. But after being here a decade, just standing in a room of parishioners and saying, I really love being in this congregation. It is a delight to be your pastor. What I've learned is that's a blessing for my congregation and for me. But I couldn't have done that the first couple of years. I didn't know the congregation well enough. Probably didn't even believe that the first couple of years, to be honest with you. But so the authenticity really matters.
It does.
It does, yeah.
I think Bob, what I'm going to take out of this is to open my eyes, because people
Yes.
do wonderful things that are blessings all the time.
Right,
Watch for them.
right.
Be
And take delight in it.
present.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
pay attention.
Yeah.
Paying attention.
Pay attention makes a huge difference. And then you have people like in my case, my husband, who said, I see a potential here for a blessing. Why don't you think about it?
Think about it.
Think about that, and that's why community can be really, really important. I mean, I'll have someone come to me and say, so-and-so is doing so-and-so in the church, da-da-da-da-da. Why don't you go watch, go see? It was really funny when someone came to Jesus and said, are you really the Messiah? Are you the one we should be following? And Jesus said, come and see. Tell him to come and see. Come and see. So I think when someone tells you, come see this, then that's also a sign that there's something here that I probably need to look at and delight in. Yeah. Yeah.
What word that came to me that on your list there that no one has mentioned is a person who's spiritually mature is an encourager.
Yes, and that is exactly what this does, an encourager.
Yeah.
An encourager. That's beautiful, yeah. That's what we want to be.
Yes.
And I was with a woman on Friday. She's 92 years old, and she was my Sunday school teacher probably when I was in 7th, 8th grade. And she was at my daddy's funeral. And she comes up to me, and she can't really walk very well anymore. A couple of people were helping her. She came to give me a hug and to tell me she was thinking about me, and then gave me encouraging words about what I had said, and then told Al encouraging words about it. But it wasn't just good pastor. She was delighting in it. And she said to me, I don't get out very much anymore. I have to encourage in prayer. And I thought, in the end, if we are the mature disciples of Christ, there's going to come a time when that is how we're going to do this. But until then, I'd like to be able to have some words to say. But it doesn't ever stop. It doesn't ever stop. We get to encourage until the very end. So, I've invited Janice Claflin to join us next week, because the last thing we really need to talk about, it keeps coming up again and again about elderhood, is our grief. In our elderhood, we need to face and deal with our grief in ways that are positive and life-giving for those around us. And I think Janice is going to be the perfect person to help us think a little bit about that. Thank you for paying attention and for being here. And we will gather one more time next week. So thanks a lot.